It was a bright Saturday morning at Riverside International School, a place known for its luxury. Marble hallways, imported trees, and students who arrived in sports cars driven by chauffeurs. Among them was Ethan Cole, a quiet 11-year-old boy born with a condition that confined him to a wheelchair. He was kind, intelligent, and polite, but in this school kindness was often mistaken for weakness. During recess, Ethan sat alone under a large oak tree unpacking his lunch. His classmates laughed in groups, tossing footballs and teasing whoever didn't fit their mold. It didn't take long before 3 older boys noticed him. "Hey, look, Wheels is having a picnic again," one of them shouted. Another snickered. "Maybe he's waiting for someone to feed him." The laughter echoed. Ethan tried to ignore them, keeping his eyes on his sandwich, but his trembling hands gave him away. The bullies surrounded him, blocking the sunlight, their smirks growing meaner by the second. Not far away, at a small outdoor cafe just across the fence, Seagal sat quietly sipping green tea. Dressed in a black jacket and shades, he looked like just another middle-aged man enjoying his morning peace. But his sharp eyes missed nothing. When he saw one of the boys shove Ethan's wheelchair slightly, something in Seagal's expression changed. A subtle shift from calm to focused. He set down his cup slowly, his fingers steady. Inside the schoolyard, Ethan tried to push back, his voice cracking. "Please, just stop." The bullies only laughed harder. One of them leaned close and whispered, "What's the matter? Can't stand up for yourself?" At that moment, the sound of a chair scraping against the cafe's pavement broke the air. Seagal stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the table. With slow, deliberate steps, he began walking toward the gate that separated him from the schoolyard. The bullies hadn't noticed him yet, but everyone else had. The cafe grew silent, waiters freezing mid-step. There was something about his calm, controlled walk that felt dangerous, the kind of stillness before a storm. What Seagal did next made everyone, including the bullies, freeze in disbelief. Seagal pushed open the old iron gate, its hinges creaking as he stepped into the courtyard. His movements were slow but deliberate, every stride measured, every glance precise. The bullies didn't notice him at first. They were too busy laughing as Ethan tried to wheel himself away. One of them grabbed the handle of Ethan's wheelchair and spun it halfway around. The boy's books tumbled to the ground. "Oops," the ringleader mocked. "Guess you dropped something, champ." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "Please, just leave me alone," he said quietly. "Or what?" The bully sneered. "You gonna chase me?" Before Ethan could reply, a calm, deep voice broke through the courtyard. "That's enough." The laughter stopped instantly. The bullies turned, startled. Standing behind them was a tall man with calm eyes and a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Seagal didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just stood there watching them, silent, motionless. One of the boys frowned. "Who are you, old man?" Stephen took a slow step closer. "Someone who's tired of seeing cowards pick on the weak." The boy laughed nervously. "Cowards? You talking to me?" Seagal's tone stayed calm, but his gaze was sharp. "I'm talking to anyone who thinks bullying makes them strong." For a moment, nobody moved. The courtyard fell silent except for the soft squeak of Ethan's wheelchair wheels. Some nearby students had started recording on their phones. Others whispered, recognizing Seagal but unsure if it was really him. The ringleader rolled his eyes and pushed Seagal's shoulder, a mistake he instantly regretted. Seagal didn't flinch. With a subtle movement, almost too fast to see, he redirected the boy's hand and turned his balance against him. The bully stumbled backward, landing hard on the grass. Gasps filled the air. Seagal didn't raise his fists. He didn't even change expression. He simply said, "That's how quickly power disappears when you use it the wrong way." The other boys froze. Their fake bravado melted away, replaced by fear and confusion. Ethan stared in shock, his mouth slightly open. Seagal turned to him and crouched down, lowering himself to the boy's level. His voice softened. "You okay, son?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Seagal began picking up Ethan's books one by one, placing them neatly in his lap. The gesture was small, but it meant everything. Around them, whispers rippled through the crowd. "Wait, that's Seagal, isn't it?" "No way, what's he doing here?" The bullies exchanged nervous glances. They'd gone from predators to prey in seconds. The ringleader muttered, "We didn't mean anything." It was just a joke. Seagal stood again, towering over them. His calm voice carried authority that needed no shouting. Bullying isn't a joke. It's weakness wearing a mask. You think you're strong because you make others feel small. But real strength comes from control, discipline, and respect. The words cut deeper than any punch could. One of the teachers came rushing over, her eyes wide. "What's going on here?" Seagal gave her a short nod. "Just a lesson," he said simply. The teacher recognized him instantly. "Wait, are you Steven Seagal?" He gave a faint half-smile. "Sometimes," he said quietly, then turned back to Ethan. "You're going to be fine, son. Remember, nobody decides your worth but you." Ethan smiled for the first time that day. His small voice trembled. "Thank you, sir." The bullies stood frozen, unsure whether to apologize or run. Seagal looked at them one last time and said, "You owe him an apology now." Their faces flushed red. "We're sorry," the ringleader mumbled. Ethan looked down, still shaken, but managed to whisper, "It's okay." Seagal placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "No, it's not okay. But you forgave them, that's real strength." Around them, students began clapping softly. The moment grew, a ripple of respect moving through the courtyard. For the first time, the bullies felt the weight of their own shame. As Seagal turned to leave, he noticed a black limousine slowing down outside the school gates, but he didn't pay it much attention. He was already walking away, hands in his pockets, as quietly as he had arrived. The camera phone stayed focused on him, recording every step. Within minutes, the footage would start spreading like wildfire online. Have you ever seen someone stand up for a stranger like this? Tell us your thoughts below, and comment where you're watching this from. Which country and city are you joining us from today? The scene faded with Ethan looking down at his books, but this time they didn't feel heavy. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel small. He didn't know it yet. But this simple act of courage was about to change everything, not just for him, but for his father, the man who was about to arrive. The courtyard buzzed like a hive after Steven Seagal's quiet intervention. Students whispered his name in disbelief, teachers murmured among themselves, and the three bullies stood frozen, faces pale. Pride shattered, Ethan sat quietly in his wheelchair, clutching his books as if they were a shield. His heart was still racing, but inside something had changed. For once, someone had stood up for him, not out of pity, but out of respect. Seagal, ever calm, adjusted his jacket and looked around. "It's over," he said softly. "Go back to class." His tone wasn't angry. It was final. The crowd slowly dispersed, but a few students stayed behind, phones still recording. The video was already spreading on social media, but Seagal didn't care. For him, it wasn't about fame or attention. It was about doing what was right. He turned to Ethan. "You got family nearby, son?" Ethan nodded. "My dad's at work. He's busy most of the time." Seagal crouched beside him again, his deep voice steady. "Busy doesn't mean he doesn't care. You just remember, being strong doesn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes it means knowing when not to." Ethan looked up at him, eyes wide with admiration. "Are you really Steven Seagal?" A faint smile tugged at Seagal's lips. "Last I checked." The boy chuckled, wiping away tears. For a brief moment, the fear vanished, replaced by something warm, something powerful. But the peace didn't last long. From across the courtyard, the sound of screeching tires pierced the air. A sleek black limousine rolled to a stop by the gate. Everyone turned their heads. The door swung open and out stepped Richard Cole, tall, sharply dressed, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from owning half the city. The principal hurried over, panic etched on her face. "Mr. Cole, I assure you everything is under control." Richard raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes locked onto Ethan. "What happened to my son?" The crowd parted instantly. Seagal remained standing beside Ethan, arms folded calmly across his chest. Ethan looked down, suddenly small again. "It's okay, Dad. It's fine now." But Richard wasn't listening. His gaze shifted to Seagal. "Who are you?" he demanded. Before Seagal could answer, one of the teachers jumped in nervously. "Sir, there was an incident. Some boys were harassing your son. This gentleman intervened? Richard snapped. "So you're telling me a stranger had to protect my son in my school?" Seagal's expression didn't change. "No one had to, sir. I just did what any man should do." The tone was respectful but firm, and somehow that only made Richard bristle more. He was used to people bowing to his name, not standing level with him. "You think you can just walk in here and—" Richard began, but Seagal interrupted quietly. "Your son didn't need me. He just needed someone to remind the world that he deserves respect." For a long moment, Richard said nothing. The words hit harder than he expected. Around them, teachers and students listened in silence. Richard finally looked down at Ethan. "You okay, buddy?" Ethan nodded slowly. "He helped me, Dad. They were making fun of me." The father's jaw tightened. "Who?" The three bullies stood a few yards away, heads bowed, shaking. Seagal gave them one look, and that was enough. They muttered apologies again before backing away. Richard took a deep breath, his anger cooling but not gone. "I appreciate what you did," he said stiffly, "but next time let the school handle it." Seagal's response was calm but sharp. "If they were handling it, I wouldn't have needed to step in." The words hung heavy in the air. A few teachers looked away, embarrassed. The principal tried to diffuse the tension. "Mr. Seagal, perhaps we can all discuss this inside." But Seagal shook his head. "Nothing to discuss. The boy's safe. That's all that matters." He turned as if to leave, but Ethan grabbed his sleeve gently. "Wait, will I ever see you again?" Seagal looked at the boy, then smiled faintly. "Maybe, but you don't need me, kid. You've already got everything you need, right here." He tapped Ethan's chest softly. Then, with a nod, he walked away, silent, steady, unstoppable. Richard watched him go, confusion mixed with curiosity. Something about that man didn't fit the usual mold. He wasn't asking for attention, money, or recognition. He was different. He looked at his son again, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, saw not the wheelchair, not the condition, but the boy inside it. Ethan whispered, "Dad." He said real strength is respect. Richard's expression softened, though he tried to hide it. "Yeah, he's right." As the limo drove them home, Richard couldn't shake the image of Seagal's calm defiance, or the shame in realizing that a stranger had shown his son more protection in one afternoon than he himself had in years. If you were Ethan's dad, how would you have reacted seeing someone defend your child like that? Let me know in the comments, and tell us what country and city you're watching from. The stage was set. The video of the encounter was already spreading online. But what happened next would shock everyone, especially the billionaire father who thought money could solve everything. That night, the Cole mansion glowed like a palace overlooking the city. From the marble floors to the chandeliers, everything screamed perfection. Yet for the first time, Richard Cole felt something missing. He sat in his private study, nursing a glass of whiskey, the glow of his computer screen reflecting in his eyes. The video, the one of Steven Seagal standing up for Ethan, had gone viral overnight. Millions had already viewed it. The headline read, "Steven Seagal steps in to defend disabled boy from bullies, crowd stunned by his calm power," and right below the title, Ethan's face. His son's quiet, nervous smile. Richard leaned back, staring at the screen, replaying the moment when Seagal said, "Your son didn't need me. He just needed respect." That line had been shared thousands of times. Comment after comment praised Seagal's composure. People were calling it the most powerful real-life lesson of the year. Richard's assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Sir, CNN wants a statement. They're asking if you'd like to comment on the incident involving your son." He waved her off. "Not now." When she left, silence filled the room again, thick and heavy. For once, Richard wasn't thinking about damage control, PR, or public image. He was thinking about something far simpler. The kind of man he'd become. He had everything: wealth, status, and power. But what had that done for Ethan? His son still ate lunch alone, rolled himself into classrooms where people saw his chair before they saw him. And Seagal, a man with no fancy car, no press entourage, and I had seen what no one else did. Richard sighed deeply, stood up and walked to Ethan's room. The boy was still awake, sitting by the window, tablet glowing softly in his hands. He was watching the video too, replaying it with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Hey, champ," Richard said gently. Ethan turned. "Dad, everyone's talking about it." "They're calling him a hero." Richard smiled faintly. "He is, but so are you." Ethan tilted his head. "Me? You didn't let fear win. You faced them. That takes more courage than most grown men have. Ethan looked down, blushing. I just didn't want to be a problem. Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. A problem? That was how his son saw himself? Because of how the world treated him? Because of how he, as a father, had failed to make him feel strong? He knelt beside Ethan. You're not a problem, son. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I've just been too busy being... Important to see it, Ethan smiled softly. Mr. Seagal said strength isn't about fighting. It's about respect. Richard nodded slowly. He's right. A moment of silence passed between them, filled with quiet understanding. Then Ethan asked, Do you think we'll ever see him again? Richard looked out the window at the glittering skyline. I think we will. The next morning, Richard's black SUV rolled through the gates of a modest community gym. It wasn't the kind of place he normally visited. No valet parking, no luxury equipment, just a building filled with sweat, grit, and heart. Inside, Steven Seagal was teaching a small group of kids basic self-defense. His movements were slow, deliberate, full of focus. Every gesture seemed to carry a story. When he noticed Richard standing at the door, he nodded once but didn't stop teaching. Richard waited patiently until the class ended. The kids bowed respectfully and left, whispering excitedly as they passed the billionaire. Finally, Seagal approached him, towel draped over his shoulder. You didn't have to come here, he said calmly. Richard smiled awkwardly. Maybe not. But I needed to. He hesitated, searching for words. I owe you an apology and a thank you. Seagal wiped his hands. You don't owe me anything. I didn't do it for you. I know, Richard said quickly. That's what makes it mean more. He took a deep breath. When I saw that video, I realized I've spent my life trying to control everything. My company, my image, my family. But I couldn't protect the one person who needed me most. Seagal's eyes softened slightly. Control is an illusion. Respect, that's real. When people see respect, they feel it. It changes things. Richard nodded slowly, the truth hitting hard. I want to change that, he said finally. Not just for Ethan, for other kids too. I've got resources, influence. Maybe we can build something. A foundation. Classes for kids who get bullied. Programs for parents who don't know how to help. Seagal didn't smile, but there was a spark of approval in his eyes. If it comes from your heart, not your wallet, it could make a difference. Richard extended his hand. Then help me do it. For a moment, Seagal just looked at him, then shook his hand, firm and steady. All right. But we do it my way, with discipline, not dollars. Richard chuckled. Deal. As the two men stood there, the billionaire and the martial artist, something shifted. Two worlds collided, not in conflict but in purpose. Ethan watched from the car window outside, smiling as his father and Seagal spoke. For the first time in a long while, he saw his dad not as the untouchable businessman, but as a man trying to be better. And deep down, Richard knew this was only the beginning. Weeks passed. But the story of Steven Seagal defending Ethan Cole refused to fade. It had become more than just a viral moment, it had turned into a movement. Talk shows discussed it. Hashtags like Doc, Respect Like Seagal, and Stand for Ethan trended across social media. People started sharing their own stories of standing up against bullies and injustice. Seeing this wave of positivity, Richard Cole knew the time had come to act. At a packed press conference, cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium with Steven Seagal beside him. Ethan sat proudly in the front row, his eyes shining with admiration. Richard adjusted the microphone. When I saw what happened to my son, I realized something. No amount of money or status can protect our children from cruelty. But maybe respect can. He glanced at Seagal, who gave a small nod. So today, I'm proud to announce the launch of the Foundation of Respect, a national program to help kids, schools, and parents confront bullying with strength, dignity, and awareness, and I'm honored to have Steven Seagal as our lead mentor. The room erupted in applause. Ethan grinned. Seagal gave a short bow of acknowledgement. But beneath the excitement, not everyone was pleased. Within days, media pundits began questioning Seagal's involvement. Some accused the billionaire of using Seagal's fame for publicity. Others dragged up old controversies about Seagal, twisting the story for views. Headlines blared. Is Seagal really the right role model for kids? Billionaire's PR stunt or real change? Richard saw the negativity flood in and slammed his laptop shut in frustration. "This isn't what I wanted," he muttered. Ethan wheeled into his study. "Dad, you can't control what people say. Mr. Seagal told me once, truth doesn't need to shout." Richard looked at his son, then sighed. He's right. But this time, the truth's getting buried under noise. That same evening, he drove across town to the community gym where Seagal still trained local kids. The sound of laughter and light thuds of practice filled the air. Seagal noticed Richard walk in, his expression unreadable. "You look like a man who's fighting the wrong battle," he said quietly. Richard chuckled bitterly. "You read the news?" "I don't need to," Seagal replied. "The world always attacks what it doesn't understand." Richard sank onto the bench. "They're calling it fake, saying it's all a PR move. I wanted this foundation to help people, but now it's turning into another headline circus." Seagal crossed his arms. "You started this with good intentions. Don't let noise change that. Respect isn't built in one day. It's earned, slowly, quietly." His words cut through the frustration like calm water over fire. "But how do we prove them wrong?" Richard asked. Seagal nodded toward the group of kids training. "We don't prove anything, we show it. One child, one school, one story at a time." Richard followed his gaze. Kids learning not just punches and blocks, but discipline, self-control, and teamwork. It was powerful. Real. The next week, the Foundation of Respect launched its first pilot program, a self-defense and confidence-building workshop in Ethan's school. Seagal led the class personally. Parents filled the gym bleachers, watching in awe as he demonstrated basic moves with grace and precision. While Ethan helped lead a few exercises, Seagal's voice carried across the gym. "You can't stop bullies by fighting them harder. You stop them by standing taller. When you respect yourself, others learn to do the same." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras captured every word. But this time, the focus wasn't on Seagal's fame. It was on the message. After the session, a single mother approached Richard, tears in her eyes. "My son's been bullied for months," she said. "He came home today smiling. Thank you." That moment hit Richard harder than any headline ever could. Later that night, back at the mansion, Richard and Seagal sat in the quiet garden overlooking the city lights. "You were right," Richard said softly. "It's not about proving anything. It's about doing what's right, even when no one claps for it." Seagal nodded. "Exactly. Respect isn't a stage performance. It's a way of life." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Then Richard turned toward him. "I want to take this foundation global. I want every child, and from Los Angeles to Manila, to know their worth." Seagal smiled faintly. "Big goals need strong hearts," Richard grinned. "I've got one, thanks to my son. And maybe, thanks to you." Just then, Ethan wheeled onto the patio, holding his phone. "Dad, Mr. Seagal, look." He played a clip that had gone viral again, footage from that day's workshop. The caption read, "They said it was a stunt. Now it's a movement." The video had already crossed 10 million views in 24 hours. The comment section was overflowing with people sharing how the story inspired them to speak up against bullying. Richard looked at Seagal and smiled. "Maybe the world's finally listening," Seagal replied quietly. "They always listen when you speak from the heart." As the night deepened, the three sat together under the soft city glow. The billionaire, the martial artist, and the boy who started it all. None of them knew that the greatest test of their foundation was yet to come. Because not everyone believed in redemption, and soon someone would challenge everything they stood for. The Foundation of Respect had taken off like wildfire. Within months, schools across the country were requesting Seagal's workshops. Kids were standing taller, parents were sharing stories, and even critics had begun to soften. For once, Richard Cole felt proud, not because of money, but because of meaning. But as every movement grows, so do its enemies. One morning, as Richard sat in his office reviewing new partnership proposals, his assistant rushed in, pale-faced. "Sir, you need to see this." She handed him a tablet. A breaking news headline flashed across the screen. "Steven Seagal accused of assaulting teen during foundation class." Richard's stomach dropped. He hit play. The clip showed a shaky, cropped video from a school gym. Seagal demonstrating a takedown move on a teenage student. The boy hit the mat and winced. Someone off camera shouted, "That's too rough." The video cut off there. Within hours, the clip had gone viral. News channels looped it nonstop, twisting the story. Online trolls flooded the foundation's social media pages, calling for Seagal's removal. Sponsors began to panic. Richard slammed his desk. "This is ridiculous." It was a demonstration. You can't teach self-defense without contact. But the world wasn't listening. They wanted blood, not facts. By noon, Seagal was trending again, but this time not as a hero. That evening, Richard found him sitting quietly in the foundation's empty gym. The lights dimmed, his posture calm as ever. "You've seen it?" Richard asked. Seagal nodded once. "People fear what they don't understand. They're saying you hurt a kid." Richard snapped. "I've got sponsors threatening to pull out. We could lose everything we built." Seagal looked up slowly, his voice calm but heavy. "If truth depends on money, then we've already lost." Richard paced back and forth, hands on his head. "You don't understand how this works. Reputation, trust, and it takes years to build, minutes to destroy." Seagal stood up, towering, his tone still even. "You're chasing image again, Richard. Let them talk. The truth doesn't need your PR team." For the first time, Richard felt anger toward the man he respected. "Easy for you to say. You've lived your life being misunderstood. But I have a company, a family, thousands of employees." Seagal interrupted quietly. "And a son who finally believes in what you stand for. Are you really willing to throw that away because strangers are shouting online?" That line hit him like a punch. Richard froze. He thought of Ethan, how proud he'd been, how much he'd grown. And now the same people who once praised them were ready to tear it all down. "I need to fix this," Richard said finally. "Then tell the truth," Seagal replied. "But tell it with your heart, not your lawyers." The next day, a live press conference was scheduled. Reporters swarmed the stage, cameras flashing like lightning. The air was thick with tension. Ethan sat in the audience beside his teacher, hands clenched nervously. Richard walked to the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the restless crowd. "I know why you're all here," he began. "You've seen a video, a few seconds out of a lifetime of integrity. You've read headlines written for clicks, not truth." He paused, glancing toward Seagal, who stood silently to the side. "I was there when this foundation began," Richard continued. "It wasn't built by money or fame. It was built by a man who saw my son being bullied and stood up when no one else did. Steven Seagal didn't hurt anyone. He taught them. He taught all of us what respect really means." Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard motioned to the back. "And if you want to hear the truth, maybe you should ask the person in the video." Everyone turned as a teenage boy, the same student from the viral clip, walked nervously onto the stage. He held the microphone with trembling hands. "I'm the kid from that video," he said. "Mr. Seagal didn't hurt me. He was showing us how to fall safely. He even helped me up after and said, 'You see? No fear.' He's the best teacher I've ever had." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Reporters scrambled to adjust their angles. The truth finally cutting through the fog. Seagal stepped forward, bowing slightly to the boy. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan stood up from his seat, calling out, "That's my teacher. That's my hero." The crowd erupted in applause, and loud, raw, and real. The next day, every headline flipped. Viral scandal exposed as fake. Seagal's integrity vindicated. The foundation of respect stands taller than ever. Sponsors came crawling back. Public support soared higher than before. But that night, as the noise died down, Richard found Seagal again, sitting on the foundation rooftop, looking out over the city lights. "You could have defended yourself sooner," Richard said, walking over. "Why didn't you?" Seagal smirked faintly, "Because patience is louder than panic. Sometimes the best response to lies is truth revealed by time." Richard nodded, understanding now what Seagal had been trying to teach him from the start. He sat beside him, the two men silent for a while. "You changed my life, Stephen," Richard said quietly. "You changed my son's too." Seagal looked at him, his tone soft but firm. "No, you changed when you started listening, not to the world, but to your heart." Below them, the city shimmered, a reflection of light after darkness, and somewhere deep inside, both men knew. The fight wasn't over, but they had already won the most important battle, the one for respect. Have you ever seen the media twist a story before knowing the truth? Drop in the comments if you believe patience and truth always win in the end, and tell us where you're watching from. Months passed. The noise, the scandal, the headlines all faded. But one thing didn't fade: the impact of the foundation of respect. Across schools, children learned not just how to defend themselves, but how to respect one another. Bullying reports dropped dramatically. Parents sent letters filled with gratitude. And through it all, Steven Seagal kept his word. He stayed humble, teaching quietly, never seeking fame. But one morning, Richard received a call from the foundation manager. "Mr. Cole," she said softly. "Steven's leaving." Richard froze. "Leaving? What do you mean?" He said, "His work here is done." Within an hour, Richard was driving across town, heart pounding. He found Seagal at the gym, packing his few belongings into a small duffel bag: a towel, a worn-out pair of gloves, and a black belt faded with time. "You're really going?" Richard asked. Seagal looked up, calm as ever. "Everything has its season. You don't need me anymore. The foundation's in good hands." Richard shook his head. "You can't just walk away. You built this with me." Seagal gave a faint smile. "No, Richard. You built it. I just reminded you why." Richard stood silent. The words sank deep, simple, but true. He thought about everything Seagal had done: the viral moment, the lessons, the scandal he endured without anger. The man had been tested by the world and never once broke his calm. "Where will you go?" Richard asked finally. Seagal shrugged slightly. "Somewhere people still need to learn about respect." Richard exhaled slowly, knowing he couldn't stop him. "At least let me thank you properly." Seagal nodded once. "Just keep the mission alive." That's thanks enough. But Richard had something else in mind. The following week, he organized a special foundation event, not for the media, not for sponsors, but for the students, parents, and volunteers who'd made it all possible. Hundreds gathered in the courtyard, banners reading, "Respect changes everything." Ethan rolled up onto the stage holding a plaque wrapped in cloth. "Before we begin," he said with a big smile, "I want to give someone special a surprise." Seagal stood off to the side, arms folded, clearly unaware. Ethan turned to the crowd. "This man didn't just teach me self-defense. He taught me how to believe in myself. He showed the world that kindness can be strong, and silence can be powerful." He pulled away the cloth, revealing a plaque that read, "The Steven Seagal Dojo of Respect, dedicated to the power of dignity and discipline." The crowd erupted in applause. Seagal's eyes softened, the faintest hint of emotion breaking through his stoic calm. Richard stepped up beside Ethan. "Steven, this place will forever bear your name, not as a celebrity, but as a teacher, a protector, and a man who showed the world that true strength is in humility." The applause grew louder. Cameras flashed, but for once they weren't chasing scandal. They were capturing sincerity. Seagal looked at the plaque for a long moment, then at Ethan. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Ethan smiled. "You didn't have to help me either. But you did." A warm silence filled the air, the kind that says everything words can't. Later that evening, as the event ended and people began to leave, Seagal stood outside watching the sunset. Richard joined him. "You know," Richard said, "I used to think success was about being seen. Now I know it's about what people remember when you're gone." Seagal nodded. "Then you've learned the lesson." He turned to leave, but before walking away, he placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. "Take care of that boy. He's going to change lives, just like his father did." Richard smiled. "And if he ever needs guidance?" Seagal's lips curled into a half-smile. "He knows where to find me." With that, he walked off into the fading light, calm, silent, and unshaken, like a man who'd done what he came to do. Ethan watched from a distance, eyes gleaming. "Goodbye, Sensei." As the credits of their story rolled across millions of screens online, one message echoed louder than all the rest. True power doesn't come from strength, it comes from respect. If you believe respect can change the world, type "respect" in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what real strength looks like.